Hello and welcome to Day Home Divas. I'm Joanne,
I'm Sophia.
I'm Kat.
and today we welcome Heather Hunt, who sits as co-chair of the Alberta Family Childcare Association, and her counterpart, Kari. Heather works with supporting educators, and Kari handles the financial government side. So welcome to Day Home Divas.
Thanks. Thank you.
Could you tell us a little about the Alberta Childcare Association and what it does?
Yeah, so the Alberta Family Childcare Association has been around since the 80s, I believe. I am more of a recent addition since our agency's only been open for about 10 years. Their main goal in the time that they have been open is to support day home agencies to then support their educators to provide quality care. Although in more recent years, with all of this government stuff, we have taken a bit more of an approach directed directly to educators as well and supporting them through everything that's going on.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And specifically then, what is your role?
Right. So my role as a co-chair, a big part of what I do is endless amounts of meetings with different key government stakeholders. They ask for our input, even though they don't always take it, and we are always happy to give that to them. We have members throughout the province, and as you probably are well aware, different agencies operate so differently. The way we charge parents, the way we're funded by the government, although that's now changed. For a lot of years, there were different types of contracts, things like that. So my role specifically is getting in there and speaking to the government about what agencies and educators experience on the day to day and how the government can, help us provide those services.
Okay, excellent. And your role?
My role as co-chair is basically just hearing from other agencies and then taking that information forward.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, so do you both run day homes also?
No, so Carrie is the agency coordinator we work for Monkey Business in Medicine Hat, and I'm a consultant, so I'm a home visitor.
Okay. Have
Mhm.
you run day homes in the past?
No, neither one of us have. And so she actually just left us, but we had a third staff who had run a day home with us for almost 10 years. Before she took that role, we had her on as a peer mentor because Carrie and I very much acknowledge that we have never actually done this. And so having someone who has done the day-to-day on the floor was really important to us if there were questions that we just didn't have firsthand knowledge on. Certainly, we have a ton of childcare experience between the two of us, but we know that day home world is so different.
Yeah, so did you, for your experience then, did you work in daycare centers before?
So I've worked in daycares and preschools and out of school care and all of those things here in Medicine Hat my whole life. Carrie has some different experience I'll let her share with you.
Okay.
I'm here from the US. So, about 15 years ago, a majority of my experience and my education is from there, and it is also from the center perspective. What was interesting to me is where I'm from, in-home childcare is a last resort. It's not well managed, it's not well looked after. There's a lot of problems that come from in-home care. When I moved here, the culture around in-home care is much different. People really desired that for their infants. So I started looking more into it, and I can't ever imagine not working in the day home sector now because it's just, in my opinion, so much more superior to the center world.
Yeah, it's definitely different depending on even countries, and from what I found, even provincial is can
Hmm.
be
Yeah.
different,
Yeah,
right?
Washington State, obviously I've been here for a while, so a lot could have changed. There was just very little regulation around in-home care, and it was significantly less expensive. It was significantly more difficult to report concerns or problems because there was nobody to really report them to, besides like the child abuse hotline, which wasn't
Right.
necessarily appropriate when somebody was just having a problem that was, having to do with the care or cost or, things like that. So
Yeah,
it was not a good system.
gotcha. What are your initial thoughts on the new flat fee program?
We can only speak to our perspective because what I am coming to realize in talking to other agencies and other educators throughout the province is that each region is fighting a different fight. So down here in Medicine Hat, our families are paying upwards of $300 more per month. Some of our daycare centers were charging zero. So our main concern is these, especially low income families and families with more than one child, are having to come up with hundreds of dollars on the turn of a dime, right? Whereas
Yeah.
I know in other regions, educators are making less money and parents are paying significantly less. So I would say our biggest concern in Medicine Hat is the increase, and I want to specify the problem is not the cost. The cost is reasonable for full-time childcare, absolutely. The problem is the increase for our families who are paying little to nothing, and all of a sudden we have one family with 3 children in care who need to come up with $900 more a month. Like, it's not fathomable. So that's our biggest concern, I would say here.
Yeah, and none of our parents ever thought childcare should be free, but we didn't have a choice. It had to be. Like nobody
Right.
ever thought, oh, I should only pay $37 a month for childcare. We had to charge that. We weren't allowed to charge anything different. So it's not even that a lot of people, think that parents are becoming entitled or feel like they're entitled to these lower rates. They were forced to have these lower rates. We weren't able to do anything about that. So I think for me, one of the hardest part is it's the lowest income families that are impacted the worst by this. So our families that didn't qualify for subsidy, they're seeing about a $4 change in their
Yeah.
their full-time rate. Our families that did qualify for full subsidy are seeing a $325 change in their rate.
Oh,
So
100%. Yeah.
yeah, so just seeing how it impacts the lower income families the hardest, that's really difficult. And I would say that is the hardest part of it. And the next piece is just helping our educators navigate it and make the decisions around if they're going to have additional fees. For our educators, they don't really have that option. They do, but they don't because their parents are already receiving a $300 and some increase. So if an educator
Yeah.
then is like, oh, I also want to start charging for food now, or whatever it might be, they really can't because parents are already getting these giant increases. So it's not really even an option for our educators to start charging additional fees. They
Yeah.
price themselves out. Yeah.
Even if they're
Yeah.
providing excellent care,
Yeah.
that's a big change for our families, right?
Mhm.
They can't.
Right. So it really has felt like even though this is supposed to like provide guidelines and things, that it's really sort of tied our hands, tied educators' hands, tied parents' hands, that it's really become such a controlled environment with the
Mhm.
illusion of choices.
Right. What are the additional charges providers are allowed to charge on top of the flat fee?
So well, I'll tell you that we have put a lot of time and effort into getting straight answers to that question, and we have yet to be. But we do know for certain that food is one, field trips is another.
Right.
They have one in there that's like transportation, one that's like cultural activities or something that is such a vague title and no one really understands what it means. And then
Yeah.
there's a few others as well.
Okay. And is this going to be the same across the board? All providers are allowed to add these exact same additional fees.
There is a caveat that the contract educators have with an agency sort of supersedes this program. So if, for example, in our program plan, we have that food is provided at all of our homes, included in our fee, we can let educators charge that, but we have to go through the process of amending our program plan, which is not always a speedy thing to do when we're talking about having to have different sets of eyes on it in the government.
Right. So we are seeing that as a concern from educators in other areas where they're losing some money in this because they're in an area where the educator is going to be losing money and the parents paying less. And then on top of that, their agencies are saying, no, you can't charge any additional fees,
Yeah.
which in my personal humble opinion, that's not the agency's prerogative, like the agency's
Right.
responsibility. What am I trying to say? The agency's
Yeah,
it's
we
just
don't, we shouldn't have a say in
we
that.
should not. Our role should be to support them in what they want to choose to do. So if we had an educator come to us and say, you know what, I want to start charging for meals, I'm not going to tell her no. We're going to sit down and talk about how that could impact her potential enrollments because, we have all these other homes not charging for meals and everybody's increased their rate, whatever it might be, just so that they can make an informed decision with all the information in front of them. And then absolutely, we're happy to support whatever that educator feels is best for their program. We can go back and change it later if it doesn't work out, like
Right.
whatever it might be. So we find that for the most part, our educators will come to us first anyway and say, I'm thinking about charging fees for this. What are your thoughts? And we can kind of share with them what we're seeing around the city, around the province, and how it fits into the guidelines of the grant and what would be allowed or what wouldn't be allowed inside those guidelines, and then help them come to that decision and go from there.
To add though quickly, I think they come to us first because we do put in a lot of time
Yeah.
to build those positive relationships with them. And we absolutely acknowledge that there are agencies that don't do that, where it may not feel safe to have that discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I just want to put that out there.
Both Heather and I have educators, both private and licensed, across the province that message us on Facebook to get questions answered or to ask if
Right.
is my agency allowed to do this, or things like that. So, and sometimes it's people we hear from on a regular basis, and then sometimes there's others that just based off of posts we've made or whatever will message us. So we definitely try not to step on toes, but also are happy to provide information. A lot of educators don't always know the difference between an agency policy and licensing. And a lot of times that's because their agencies have presented it as,
Yeah.
oh, licensing won't let us, or licensing requires, or whatnot. And no, it might be in your program plan, which does mean the licensing will enforce your program plan, but you can change your program plan, you can change your policies to meet the needs of the educators that you have. Right.
Right.
So
That's fantastic that you guys are there to help other providers, even if they're not within your agency. That's great. What are some extra fees that agencies are allowed to charge their providers on top of the new $550 per month fee?
that's interestingly vague as well. When you go, so for agencies, we log into the portal, and then in there's three different sections. And one of the sections is the $400 that's part of our licensing thing. That's unchanged. That just stays how it is. It's just that's part of our licensing contracts, nothing to do with the grant. And then the next section asks us what we're using the five, like if we're charging the 550 max, it asks what we're using that for. And there's a bunch of boxes to check off, and it can be for backup care, for monitoring, for investigation, for advertising, a bunch of things. And then the next column is if you're charging more than 550, you have to write in why and what you're charging them. So for us, we will never, it's not part of well, as of right now, it is not part of our plan or our business model to ever charge more than 550. We've kept our system that we had before at a 15% of the overall tuition rate up until 550, and then that's just it. If you have five and six children enrolled, the fifth and sixth child, the agency just doesn't receive any part of that. And so we feel that within those fees, the 400 and then the five up to 550, that we can provide all the services. And we are an agency that provides insurance coverage, like we provide the homeowners insurance to our homes. We reimburse for first aid. We provide in-home backup care up to a certain amount each year. And we feel like we're able to maintain that within what we've got. We've talked about the first thing that we would, if for some reason things did go differently and the government doesn't fund us the way we hope they continue to, we'd have to look at either removing paying for insurance or charging a little bit for that insurance. So we'll make those decisions. But as of right now, as long as the government holds up what they say they're going to do, we don't expect that we would ever charge those additional fees. So I know that agencies can. I don't really, to be honest with you, know what they would
Yeah.
they would charge for.
A lot of what I'm hearing anyways are like the financial services
Oh, right.
subscriptions. Like we have Time Saver and Hi Mama
Yeah.
and those things. We've been doing just fine having that built in our percentage, so we're good. But we also know that this percentage structure that we work with is not common throughout the province.
Yeah.
So maybe it was
Okay.
easier for us. I'm not sure. But I too have been hearing probably what you've been hearing about, agencies charging 550 regardless of how many children you have, or
Yeah.
charging more than 550 regardless of how many children you have. And I feel like that's really problematic because it creates very much a different tiered system for educators based mostly on your geography.
Yeah, and I did feel a little bit of hope when they finally granted all of our variances, that at least in some areas that had larger numbers of agencies, educators finally would have some choices and wouldn't
Yeah,
be stuck with the agency that is charging them the most. They could look around. And so I think at least that step happened.
Mhm.
But there are still a lot of communities that there is one agency and that's your choice. And
right.
um, it's while I want there to be, I want every agency to be really great, but I also don't want the government to be super controlling of every agency because I know that there's things that we do that if the government got super controlling, we might not be able to do anymore. And
Right.
I don't want that taken away from us because other agencies can't keep up or aren't
Yeah.
providing the highest, levels of service to their families and educators.
Right. Do you know why the government changed the rule regarding the agency fee being charged to the providers instead of the parents?
Know exactly, but I have
Yeah.
suspicions.
So I think for one thing, they didn't understand how it worked and it simplified it for them. It
Okay.
made it so because so many different agencies charged differently. And honestly, a lot of times the way that agencies and educators talk about fees, we were talking about the same thing in a different way. Whether the fee
Right.
comes from the parent or the educator, it's the same amount of money. And so I think that that was one of the things that was probably confusing for the government. It was like, wait, you
Yeah.
guys are all talking about the same thing, but in different terms. And we recently learned too about if the fee is charged to the educators can write those fees off.
Okay.
So we've changed how we structure our pay slips so that it's very clear how much the educator pays us. Because I would
Right.
have said that we used to say that we take 15% of the tuition and the educator makes 95 or 85% of the tuition.
Right.
But now the educator makes the entire tuition and then we take back that bit. And so that way they can write it off.
Okay.
It's the
It's the
same
same
fee.
thing. Yeah, it's the same thing,
Right.
just in different
Yeah.
terms.
And I
Okay.
think that that is where the government got really confused when they did that survey a while ago now, is the questions were, how much do you pay your agency? So some people might have put zero because my parents pay it. Some people might have put $1,000 because that's how it
Right.
worked. And so that really skewed the numbers. In a lot of my meetings, they were talking about how that data was basically unusable, but there was also people who inflated their numbers to unreal numbers that the
Right.
government looked at and was like, well, that clearly is a lie, and tossed it out. Yet those are the numbers they used when they created like these regional caps. So on one hand, they're saying this is junk. On the other hand, they're saying this is what we used. And we're kind of like, well, which is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The government being unclear. Weird.
Right. And I've a little bit on the social medias and everywhere that it is like poop runs downhill. The
Yeah.
government couldn't fund agencies properly. So they said, well, you can have a max of 550, but if you want, you can charge more. And some agencies who couldn't survive without doing it, I mean, certainly there are some who are taking advantage, but there are some who couldn't survive without doing it because of the things we've been through the last few years. They decide, okay, we're going to charge these extra fees. And then educators now are making less because they're paying extra fees. And who do they pass that extra down to? Families, right? But it
Right.
all starts with the government can't fund agencies properly. And at the very bottom, parents are the ones who are paying for that.
Right.
We know that educators aren't, at least based on our area, we know that educators aren't choosing agencies solely for the bottom line. We know that. We've consistently been an agency that had a higher, educators paid us a bit more,
Mhm.
but because of the services we offered, we're very competitive. Like we're growing, I'd say, fastest.
Mhm.
And so we know that at the end of the day, the bottom line for an educator isn't
Always.
always that dollar. It's what they're getting
Right.
for it. It's the support, the services that they're getting from their agency. And so agencies have to be conscientious that this is where if we're going to charge extra fees for things, then we need to be doing these things and ensuring that our educators are receiving what they signed up for, the benefits they signed up
Mhm.
for.
And meaningful things, not
Yes.
just like
Yes.
little, you know, I say I do this because it sounds good, like things that actually matter.
One of
Right.
the things that a lot of our educators, especially new ones, really appreciate is we offer a loan program financially where we will loan them money to buy. Right now is a busy time of year for us because everybody wants to buy an outdoor playground from Costco. And so
Yeah,
we'll loan them, the money to buy that, and then they tell us how much they want deducted back each month to pay that off. And so
right.
that's something that's used a lot by our educators, especially the newer ones that get start up and they're like, oh my gosh, I need all the things.
Yeah. So there seems to be a lot of confusion regarding the extra fees providers are allowed to charge parents to help with operating costs, as stated by the government. Are agencies able to override those rules and tell their providers they are not allowed to charge the fees?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Based on your program plan and your agency policies and procedures.
That's something an educator, if an educator has an agency, if an educator said, I want to start charging families for food, and the agency says, no, you can't do that, the educator's reply should be to ask for the program plan and policies to see where that's stated. And it should be
Right,
pretty clearly stated that food is supplied as part of the fees, the tuition fees. The other little hiccup with food is probably a bad example, is I don't know if there's any licensors out there still that are saying that day homes have to require food at this point. But for a while, there was regions where licensors were like, no, day homes must supply food
right,
Standards were
because
written
standards were written
vaguely.
vaguely, right? Our licensors pretty quickly were like, no, it just says
You serve
like
meals and snacks.
it can be from the parents or from you, right? So, but or if they want to start charging for field trips, same thing. And the agency says no, you can't charge for field trips. The educator should ask, can I please see that policy and that program plan where
right.
that's outlined? One thing that is important for educators to remember, and I think this does muddy the water, is just that if a parent says no, I'm not paying that field trip fee, the child still must be included.
Right. So there have been providers that have stated their agency has decided to charge them supplemental fees, but have told the providers they're not allowed to charge the parents supplemental fees. The agencies have different rules with the government that would prevent their providers charging the extra fees, or is it
With the government,
or is it
with the
agency
government,
specific?
no. We all get the same rules. It's funny because I just texted Carrie about that like last night or the
Yeah.
night before, and how that feels very hypocritical to me. Is why am I allowed to charge you more, but you can't? Like that just seems not quite right either.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
again, when they say that they have different rules of the government, they may be referring to their program plan or their
right,
policies. I don't know that for sure. But again, that's where I would empower an educator to say, let me see those policies, please, or those the program plan and all the documents. I don't think that there's a funding guide out yet for the grant agreement, but there will be, and those are available to everybody. And I would highly encourage if an educator reads that information and it's too technical or too wordy or too hard for them to understand, for whatever reason it might be, to reach out to people who can help you, rather that be other agencies or straight to the government. Straight to the government is such a bad answer because they're so hard to get in touch with. Or AFCA's Facebook page.
Yep.
Educators can
yeah,
send questions right into AFCA. It's Heather that sees them, and she will answer your questions, and they will not be shared. We will not be. That's your agency will not know
No,
that you
I'm not gonna go
right.
paddle on it.
a question and that you had concerns or you wanted to ask that. So the educators need a place. We were talking about this previously about how there's a lot of different support associations. It would be great if some day home educators were able to start their own support association, like a peer, like a yes, that is created by, led by, and guided by day home educators. Not,
Yeah,
uh, yeah, and maybe you have a couple good agencies you know of that you can utilize their knowledge when needed, or working with AFCA so that it's like this is AFCA who represents agencies, and this is whatever group that represents the day home educators, and being able to work together. Perhaps you are able to then be a part of those leadership meetings with the government.
there
Mhm.
has been at least one that I know of that is a provider that started that type of support system. It was started for private day home providers initially, and then they branched out to include like providers with an agency. Unfortunately, they then branched out to include agencies in there who they represent and have also further branched out now to represent daycare centers as well. So it started off with we're here to support day home providers, and then unfortunately is branched.
I think it's important to note that AFCA is volunteers. And so
Yeah,
I think what an agency or what an association that was going to represent day home educators would need to be is not a business. It would need to
right.
be just volunteers. At one point in time, this is a little off topic, but a long time ago, we had in Medicine Hat the Child Care Association that was actually funded by the government. And so all the child cares in Medicine Hat, day home agencies, and child care centers could be a part of it. And we actually got some funding from the government. It paid somebody to run it. And we got
in great training and
trainings and even like materials and stuff like that. That's like probably not a long gone thing. But that's what an association that was really going to represent day home educators would need to be. It would need to be just day home educators, not a business, not for profit.
Yeah,
Yeah, nobody financially invested in it. It would have to just be, unfortunately, volunteers.
yeah,
And they would have to almost act in the same capacity as AFCA. You would come up with your title, you would get yourself registered, and then you'd be able to say to the government, hey, listen, we're a registered, or AFCA, I'm sure, would look at being able to partnership with you and be like, hey, there's another group here that represents our field,
a voice you might
a
not
voice you
hear.
might not
yeah.
hear. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think that that would be the key to the success of a day
Oh,
home.
yeah, I totally agree. The other group that I found, I think it started out that way with the best of intentions, and then unfortunately became you now buy a membership and the government funds us, and we're here on behalf of providers, which unfortunately, as soon as you let agencies and daycare centers into that group that you're protecting, I feel it's a conflict of interest and you're no longer protecting just providers, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it's good to have a partnership with the other groups that represent the other part of you because day home agencies and educators are, forever linked. And so
yeah,
it's good to have that working partnership. But yes, it's good. Your meetings should just be you guys. And it should
yeah,
just be your board and your people that are talking about, what issues are facing you guys without thinking about the issues that are facing necessarily the agency. We're
exactly.
we're there speaking, we're there speaking for us and for you guys. And I do think some agencies do that better than others.
Yeah.
We One of the things we pride ourselves on is being advocates for our educators. I'll ask people day and night to get the answers that our educators want. I probably ought to block on a few, but I have different email addresses, so
I know the group that you're talking about, and I saw recently a post where people were upset that agencies were in there, and I did comment like that hurts my heart because I sometimes when I'm like, ouch, that hurt, I forget there are agencies in there who would then go back to an educator who voiced a concern and, reprimand them for that. I would never do
Exactly.
that. That doesn't mean other agencies
Yeah,
won't. So I do agree with what you're saying.
yeah, yeah. We can't paint everybody with the same brush, right? Great agencies out there. There's not great agencies out there, same with providers. But I definitely think that when it comes to advocating for providers specifically, there needs to be some group that is specifically just for providers. And as soon as you let those other groups in, you're taking away from the providers and from the other groups, like agencies have support for agencies and daycares have support. Like they all require different needs. So I think to
I
claim that
will
you're
say,
supporting everybody is tough.
You need a clear voice
yeah,
in
Yeah,
any advocacy thing, right? You need to, this is our purpose. And the more you spread it out, it muddies the waters.
and I think, yeah, and I think understanding from the government's perspective, they think to themselves, well, we contract with the agency. That's who we'll talk to. That's who,
yeah,
I know in a sense, I do understand it. There was some complaints I saw across Facebook about the letters that the government will send to the agency and ask the agencies to send out to their educators. I understand why the government can't do that. Because can you imagine they don't have enough workers to answer the questions.
Right.
They don't have enough workers to educators would be sending in enormous numbers of questions to these government channels and nobody would be getting their answers. So I mean, in
Right.
an ideal world, yes,
Actually, the same four questions.
probably would.
When we see,
Yeah.
when we release a letter, we get the same four questions 30 times each, or whatever.
And in an ideal world, educators would be able to say to their agencies, these are my questions, and the agencies would go get those answers. Now, I know sometimes agencies just answer for them, whether it's right or
Yeah.
wrong or whatever might be happening. But I think that agencies, and this time is the first time that after we received those, we received another email asking us to confirm that we had sent that information out to all of our educators. So that's at least a
Wow.
step. They're at least
Yeah.
requiring a little bit of accountability and saying, hey, agencies, we told you to send these letters out to your parents and your educators. Did you do it?
Yeah.
And so, we're obviously able to write back, yep, we sure did. But I think that's at least a step in the right direction for accountability. And again, if we could get either your own group or go over and follow AFCA, Heather posts all of that stuff too there. So
Yeah.
it's easy for educators to find it if for some reason they're not receiving it.
Okay. So one provider has claimed that their agency is allowing them to add supplemental food fees. However, if the parent opts out, they still have to provide care and food. So the new rules state that if a parent opts out and refuses to pay the supplemental fees and does not want to bring food, then a provider cannot force them and the child cannot be excluded. Obviously, a provider cannot give notice to a family to them not being willing to agree to the new terms either. So where does that leave the providers that are themselves struggling financially?
In a really crappy position.
Yeah.
That was not, I mean, that's a policy that was written by a policymaker, not somebody who works in the field.
And also something
Yeah.
that might be easier to accommodate in a daycare center,
Yes.
where, okay,
Right.
we're going to put the families who aren't on our meal plan in this room. I mean, we're talking about segregation, which is a whole different
Issue with this program.
barrel of monkeys. But it's easier to kind of divide that up so that you aren't seeing children get delicious, hot, home-cooked meals every day while they have their packet of goldfish. I love goldfish, nothing
Right.
against goldfish, but it's two separate things. In a day
Yeah.
home, if you're serving everybody but one child this delicious homemade soup and they're eating cold chicken nuggets, like that's a much more in your face kind of
Yeah.
division, right?
Exactly.
You know what, I don't, I might catch flack for saying this, is when educators are interviewing families, you just have to be like very clear. I charge this. Are you okay with that? And we're not supposed to deny enrollment based on if they can do that or not. But I also think it is so, so, so important that you choose families who are on board with your program. That would be my biggest advice, is from the get-go, make sure. However, I also don't think families that are coming in after the fact are going to be as upset, because they're going to think 325 or 326.25, that's great, that's cheap. Okay, no problem. Again, if families who are seeing an increase that are like, and now you want to charge me for this too? No.
Or educators that are
Right.
receiving. Yeah, so I wonder in the situations where educators are receiving a decrease, in most of those situations, it means that parents are also paying less, correct?
Yeah, I would assume so. Yeah.
We have two opposite problems. Like it's either parents pay more and educators make more, or parents pay less and educators make less.
Right.
So perhaps there's a middle ground in that parents are paying less to allow for educators to charge for that food without parents going all the way back up to what they were previously paying, so that the
Right.
educator is recouping a little bit of that lost income.
Yeah. The agencies have been given a max amount that they can charge at $550 a month, but they can charge extra fees. So if they provide a service they didn't previously provide, some providers are claiming that they are being charged $700 to $900 a month in agency fees. How are agencies going to justify those extra fees?
In what we're understanding is that they have to justify it in the portal, and that if it feels out of whack to whoever is reading these justifications, that those government officials would follow up with the agency. We don't know, obviously, yet how quickly that could
Yeah.
happen, if that will happen, who that will happen to. I could next month I could just throw in like charge a random educator, like say that I charged $1,000 and see if anybody calls me about it.
Right.
Just test the
So,
water. So and I
yeah,
don't imagine for us we'll ever know because we just don't plan on using that additional
right.
fees. So
So
I'm thinking about
it's a government official that will have to say that those are fees are
somebody
not
on the
okay.
other end of that portal. I would say if I was an educator and I felt like my agency was charging me unfair additional fees, the first thing I would ask to see is the information that they're putting into the portal as to what they're charging me for, just to ensure that they are actually charging for things that I'm receiving, for one,
Right.
to start there. And then you can start to have the discussion about whether or not that's a fair fee or not for those items. But I do think that educators should feel empowered to have these conversations with their agencies, remembering that it is a two-way street, that the conversations
Right.
need to be respectful and need to be goal orientated, even when there's a lot of frustration involved.
Yeah.
And that if you really feel like your agency is hiding information from you or not sharing the right information with you, that you do have options. Like you can seek out that information in other places or through the government and Childcare Connect. You can call there too, and they can help get you to the right people to answer the questions. I know, unfortunately, educators receive a lot of replies from the government that say, ask your agency.
Yeah.
And so, and that's difficult. I mean, that's and to be fair, that's the government trying to tell the agencies to do their job. Like
Yeah.
it's your responsibility. So I think the government needs to hold agencies accountable too, though. Like, which I will say that asking for the information on the additional fees is definitely a step towards accountability. That we've never had to, up until this contract, we've never had to justify why we charged or what we charged. I mean, I could have charged educators 50% if I wanted, and nobody would have. It was a free market. It was then people won't
Yeah.
sign. So at least there are some steps towards accountability. Those pieces will have to get fine-tuned over
Right.
the next little while.
Well, in the best case scenario, they take this information that everyone's putting into the portal,
Mhm.
they combine it and they say, okay, here's a reasonable cost for time saver or scenarios. They compile everything and come up with flat rates so that you don't have people charging 200 and people charging $10.
Right. There's been a few providers that have asked their agency like simple questions about the fees and stuff, and then their agency has fired them. I'm not sure what the terms are. Can they take any action against those agencies, or are they just out of luck and gotta look for someone else?
Any action against agencies usually would go through licensing. That's where an educator would report concerns. But as far as an agency's prerogative to terminate a contract, they're in control of that.
Right.
I just really hope that they're in an area where they can choose a different agency. I
Yeah.
know that that's not an option for a lot of people, and
Right.
but also at the same time, if a licensing continually gets complaint, like let's say you have an agency that's the only agency in this area, there's no choice, that's who I have to go to. And if licensing continues to receive complaints from educators regarding that agency, they will come. I mean, we had a little run of parents that were quite angry with us over having to pay their bills. So like essentially that's what it boiled down to. We had Alberta Works is really hard to work with. They'll suddenly cut a client off and not pay any more on them without telling us or the client. So then the client becomes responsible for that childcare bill. We had a couple in a row. They all called licensing on us, and sure enough, licensing came out to just come see what was going on, what's happening. We explained everything and it was fine. So I do think that if educators continually report concerns, even if it's business practice concerns, because licensing will be like, well, we don't have anything to do with business practice concerns. But if licensing is continually hearing from educators about the same day home agency, then they would take action, I would think, or at the very least be more willing to allow another agency to open.
Right. Yeah. How strict are the guidelines with having new agencies open? If there's areas there's not enough agencies to accommodate all the providers, what's holding them back?
So we don't actually know a lot about that because we applied for more spaces about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and all we kept getting told over and over and over and over by the government was variances are on hold. new licenses are on hold. That was all we got told. And then all of a sudden, right before these new contracts in November, sure, October was it, we get a message that our variance is approved and we're good to go. And then we found out that that was across the province. Everybody who had a variance in was suddenly had their variances approved, but we have not heard anything about reopening licenses.
Okay. When I was doing research for a previous episode, I was trying to find out what, like, how many providers each agency is allowed to have, and nothing. I could not find any information regarding that. The only thing I could find was saying that they can have as many providers as they want, which doesn't seem to be the case when you hear providers talking about they can't,
Yeah.
they want to go with another agency, but they're not accepting new providers. So what are the guidelines with that?
Our contract determines how many educators we're allowed to have. And so we reached our max, so we were having to turn people away. And then so we have two things. We have a max number of educators and a max number of children. So sometimes some agencies, depending on what their maximum children were, they were running out of child spaces before,
Right.
even though they still had educator spaces. Um, our license matches 6 children to one home. But there was a lot of agencies, especially like Calgary region, it seemed like that were at like 4.2 kids per home. So, uh,
That's weird.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and any home then, because their licenses were so old, it was from when your kids counted, when your own children
Right.
counted. So they
Okay.
assumed each home
Yeah.
maybe had about 2 children of their own, and that they would only need four
Okay.
enrollments. But we have homes that have like 9 or 10 kids enrolled because they've got kids that are part-time and come on different days and or school agers that
Right.
only show up on or whatever. So we do know though that those pieces, the number of educator pieces are driven by the legislation. And that is very difficult to change. That's
The
not,
Childcare Act.
yeah, the Child Care Act. That's not just a licensing thing. Like they can just change our
Right.
contract. However, we do also know there's still some more changes coming up. We were just notified last week of the new we found out about a new standards manual the same as everybody else did. Like nobody
Right.
knew that was coming. And in that information, that's being updated again the end of April and again in September. And we think that probably has to do with some of the stuff that they're working on in the legislation right now.
Okay. We've seen quite a few providers that are now going to be losing income every month. Some have claimed as high as 1,800 a month. How are agencies going to be helping to ensure they can still manage to operate? I get
I
that might not apply to you guys,
yeah,
but
Yeah.
I have my co-chair for AFCA. They service High River, and each of those educators are going to be losing, I believe she said $293 per child per month. And all that she can do is advocate on these meetings with leadership. And that, we've been talking lots about kids and agencies and educators, but we need to also touch on communities. Like that is going to devastate that entire community because they were all unlicensed before these changes came in, and they were begging agencies to come up there because their families could benefit so greatly from this affordability grant. So finally, Sonia's agency went up there and got them all licensed. They're not going to stay licensed if they're losing $300 a month per child. They can't. How can you possibly do
right.
that?
The
Yeah.
part too that really gets me is that the intent is it'll be to $10 a day next March, which is like 200 a month for parents. So like we increased all their fees to just decrease them again next year. Like it just is, it doesn't yeah, it's very messy. The whole thing, very
Yeah.
messy.
Stay home providers have always been able to set their own monthly rates in the past. Providers are essentially contractors that work for an agency, and the agency then works for the government. So if providers don't work directly for the government, should the government then be able to dictate what the providers can charge?
Find this a very gray area too. The only thing I ever can really compare it to, I use as an example all the time, is my husband's a contractor in the trades. He's never once set his own rate. Like he gets told the rate for this job is this, and he either signs that contract or doesn't. So I'm not really sure how that applies when you change a field. I mean, in an ideal world, educators would be able to choose all their own grades, and the government wouldn't be, do it, or they'd be just paid fairly. And the government can do what they want, but pay fairly. So I don't really know how that actually impacts. I think it would be great if we had like a senior CRA official that could help explain those things a little bit clearer because like I said, my husband's never worked on a job site where he picked his rate. They tell him, here's the rate for this job, and he's contracted at that rate.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
We did talk a lot about that when it first came in,
Mhm.
and we had a lot of educators who were upset about it, even though our educators
They all
are like suggested agency fee so that they're not competing with each other. We always give them the spiel like, you're welcome to charge whatever you want. This is what the majority of our educators charge. And for the most part, they're like, yeah, I'm good with that. But we did talk about that, and a lot of them were mad that that was taken away from them when our fees were locked in that Schedule A.
Yeah, I mean, that happened 2 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, it's been a
That's
while.
fine. They said we couldn't change our fees.
Right.
They were mostly frustrated that they couldn't have that increases.
Regular
The
increase.
regular increase. Like we used to up until this stuff every September, our fees went up to, you know,
Might not be much.
yeah, it's like cost of living increases and such. But yeah, so they also, I mean, we do make sure they still feel empowered for their hourly fees, their daily fees, their school ager fees, their extended care fees, all the things that fall outside of the grant to be able to charge whatever they want there.
Right. So in a Facebook post, Kathleen had said, are we independent contractors or employees? Alberta's licensed family day home providers are losing control over their business, yet we are still classified as independent contractors. Are we truly independent, or are we actually employees without the rights and benefits that come with it? Canada Revenue Agency considers 4 key factors when determining whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor. Control: employees must follow employer policies, procedures, and schedules. Independent contractors control their own operations. Financial risk: employees receive a guaranteed wage. Independent contractors take financial risks, such as setting their own rates and handling unpaid fees. Opportunity for profit: employees have a fixed income. Independent contractors have increased earnings by adjusting pricing and expanding their services. Business independence: employees work under an employer structure, and independent contractors run their own business, set their own rates, develop their own policies. Does it sound familiar?
Yeah, so a couple pieces there to just consider is rather you're a contractor, an employee or an employee, you are subject to regulations in a field. And that's essentially what our Family Day Standards Manual is it's regulations that guide our field. And in those regulations, it says the agency has to have a program plan that must be followed, right? So
Right.
for me, it's just so muddy and so gray and so unclear. And we can thank the government that.
Yeah.
I do, and I think that it is important to, when you're looking at the differences between being employees and being contracted, there's a lot of things I see from the agency perspective that having them as employees, I don't know how that works, honestly, because
Right.
if you have and the like the guaranteed pay pieces and things like that, like if you only have one child enrolled, I can't pay you the same as if somebody has 6 children enrolled because I'm literally not receiving the revenue to do that.
Right.
I don't have the funds to actually do that for you. So the only way that they could really probably consider employment is if the government was their employer. And I don't see the government thinking it's a good idea to hire.
No, and that's what you saw in
Well, that's what I saw in Washington. Yeah, the government couldn't monitor them because they didn't have enough licensors to do that.
Right.
And the government didn't hire them in Washington either, though. But like, I have a hard time thinking the government would want to hire every single day home and then have to regulate and monitor every single day home. So they would have to.
But then that becomes a problem, the monitoring and regulations,
Yes.
holding them.
Yes. Are they going to monitor exactly? And then the problem of too, like, okay, so educators do get the benefits of being a contractor too when you're looking at your tax situation and at what you can write off and what you can use, because that changes when you become an employee as well. There's still certain write-offs that you can use for employment, but it's not to the same level as you do as a self-employed person. I think that in general, the day home field is just super gray. I mean, even with agencies, they threw us into nonprofits, even though we're not nonprofits. But when they're talking about the grants, we're considered part of the nonprofit sector. So I think that there's just like kind of a not knowing what we really look like. And if educators feel that they want to be employed, I would say that there has to be some thought put into how that would work, like the actual mechanics of it, not just, oh, well, the benefits are that I would have consistent pay or whatever it might be, like the actual mechanics of the way it would work. Because I don't think there's any educator that would think it's fair if somebody with one child is getting paid the same amount as somebody with six children. But then do you switch their pay every month as people like get two children for 1 month and then this one had five
Right.
children? Like their pay is always going to have to be based off of the children they have enrolled. It's not like a center
Yeah.
where it's just absorbed. And so I think that guaranteed pay piece sounds really nice, but it's just not feasible.
Keep in
Yeah.
mind that the control, I don't like that word, but the control that that gives agencies, can I then say, Kate, your hours are 7 to 5, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to do these things. The things that I'm going to go ahead and say good agencies are leaving up to educators are
Right.
gone. Those then become dictated things. And I know at least our educators, the majority of them got into this specifically because they were contractors and they could make those choices. But again, they could make those choices because they were with an agency.
Our day homes don't need to ask us for a day off or to go on vacation or what. They can
Right.
close whenever they want. It's their business
Yeah.
and they can make those decisions. And so I think that would be I guess my biggest question back to that would be, are educators seeking out wanting to become employees because their agencies aren't doing their job?
Right.
Right, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
is wanting to be an employee a product of being with an agency that's not providing the level of support and what you,
Respect.
yeah, and respect you need? Because yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I would
Yeah.
that's what,
None of our educators, because I brought that up to them. I've been bringing it
yeah,
up to them at visits and stuff.
they're
They're
like,
like,
no.
what? Why would they want that? And it is because they're not receiving the support and respect that,
Yes.
and I keep tooting our own horn, but like our educators are blissfully unaware.
They are.
Possibility.
Well, one of the biggest things that our agency does for our educators obviously is handles the financial aspects, like the collecting of money, and we take that financial risk for them. So in our agency, I thought that's how it always worked, but I guess I don't really know. You are always paid for the hours you work, no matter what, no matter if a parent pays or not. So if you took care of a child for the month of January and that parent was like, see ya, and didn't pay us for the month of January, you're still getting paid. You're getting paid for the hours
Right.
you work no matter what. We take that financial risk. And so we are hearing that there's an agency where the educators have to collect the fees from the parent and then pay the agency. So if they can't get the fees from the parent and they don't pay the agency, then the agency's mad at them because they didn't collect their fee. I'm like, what is going on? That's absurd to me. That's
Right.
absurd.
I mean, like I'm a private provider, and so is Cash and Sophia. And that's always been one of the big differences with the agencies. And what a lot of agency providers say is that their benefit is they don't have to collect the fees from the parents. So if an agency all of a sudden was said, nope, that's on you, that would be, yeah,
Yeah, like
exactly.
what's the point? That's what I spend my life doing.
Right.
We actually, just as one more crazy thing to tell you, we've heard that there's an agency now who is charging educators a deposit to sign up with them. It's like $1,000 deposit. And if you don't stay for a year, they keep your deposit. And I mean, this will come of no surprise to you. That agency, I'm hearing from educators, do not provide hardly anything. So
That is
you make a
ridiculous.
choice of losing $1,000, or yeah, we were talking about that on AFCA, and we're like, we need to find out which agency this is because that is just crazy.
Yeah.
Sometimes that we want to pitch the government our idea to be the agency of agencies.
Yeah.
So that we can boss all the agencies around and be like, these are the good policies, these are the bad policies.
Right. So
Find some consistency.
Quebec providers are recognized as employees of the government. They have a union that negotiates their wages and benefits. They receive full employment protections. But I tend to agree with some of the points that you brought up. This becoming an employee of either the agency or the government, that's going to muddy the waters of a lot of things. How much control then does the government have, say, over your home that you pay the mortgage for, not the government, right? So I think it definitely muddies the waters a lot with, the even considering how it would all work. I think there are some benefits for providers for sure. Definitely come tax time, you get your T4 and you file your taxes super easy, but at what cost, right? I think providers maybe some of the ones that are think, yes, that's absolutely the way to go. Maybe they haven't thought those parts through, or maybe they have and they still see the benefits. It's
Yeah,
hard to
I'll
say.
tell you, I don't want that control over their businesses.
Right?
I don't want to be in charge of that stuff. You know, I have seen amazing educators and amazing programs flourish because they choose to step outside of what everyone else is doing. And I think
Yeah,
taking that away from them is doing a disservice to families and to educators, right? It's putting them in
yeah,
little tiny boxes.
So I feel too like the relationship that we have right now with educators or the agencies have with educators, um, at least for us, brings about an air of working together and of wanting the best for both and trying to cooperate throughout the system and all the different things that happen in a day home. And then I feel like if you change that to an employee employer, suddenly I'm your boss. We would never refer to ourselves as our educators' bosses. A lot of times we're like, we work
right.
for you.
Yeah. They're really
Yeah,
uncomfortable. They're like, oh, my boss is here. I'm like,
That's not us. And so I think that was that for the good agencies that are doing well. And we know we're talking a lot right now about agencies that aren't doing the right things, but there are a lot of really good agencies across Alberta too.
yeah,
And I think for us, changing that relationship to an employer employee, it wouldn't be great for either party. Like both parties would feel like, wait, that's not the control I want to have over what you're
right,
doing. And once you have employees, we always talk about our day homes being independent businesses. So sometimes what goes yes for this business would be a no for this one. It might be because of the space they have, it might be because of the outdoor space, it could be for a lot of reasons, the families they have enrolled. When you become an employee, there's a lot more, nope. This is this is the rule, and all employees must follow that rule. You have to ask me for your time off. You have, all the different
and they
things.
control which families come to your home. Like a center director would control which families go into
Yeah,
rooms.
yeah.
I don't want to do that. That's just going to cause
right.
more headache for me later on. Yeah,
Yeah, no, that would definitely, I would not be
complicated
okay with
question.
that for sure.
It is a very complicated question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All right.
awesome.
Thank you.
And that's it for Day Home Divas this week.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Day Home Divas, on TikTok at dayhome.divas, and join our Facebook group, Day Home Divas.
Hope you join us again next week.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.